bring the jury in, please.
Yes, sir.
Seated in the courtroom. Welcome back, everybody. Everybody has good lunch. Actually, I try not to keep you cooped up in there for too long. I know it's kind of small, so I'll try to get you back out of there as soon as possible. We are ready to proceed. We are still in the state's presentation of their cases. State, call your next witness, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state calls Dr. Frederick Hewlett.
Good afternoon. If you could take the witness stand over here. Have you remain standing when you get there. Raise your right hand, please.
Do you solemnly swear and affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Proceed. Counsel, you may proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Could you introduce yourself to the jury?
I'm the chief medical examiner for 3 counties, as for St. John's, Putnam, and Flagler. We are located in St. Augustine. My name is Frederick Buick, P-R-E-D-R-A-G, and the last name is B-U-L-I-C.
Thank you, doctor. You said that you are the chief medical examiner for St. Johns County as well as some of the surrounding counties, correct?
Yes.
And that office is located here in St. Augustine?
Yes.
How long have you been the chief medical examiner for this area?
Since May 2011.
What are your duties as the chief medical examiner?
My duties are to supervise the staff and to basically run the office of the medical examiner. Also, the main part of my duties is to perform autopsies and to determine the cause and manner of death in certain scenarios, certain situations where by law is required.
Are you a duly licensed physician in the state of Florida?
Yes, I am.
Can you just briefly describe your educational background as it relates to what you do?
Okay. I'm a medical doctor licensed to practice medicine in Florida. I also have a board certification, and it's a double board certification in forensic pathology and surgical pathology. I completed fellowship in forensic pathology in Fort Lauderdale, and then after that I was hired to do a job as an associate medical examiner in Volusia and Seminole counties prior this position that I have right now. And I also completed a residency in clinical and anatomic pathology in Worcester, Massachusetts. That was for 5 years duration. And prior to that, I was emergency room physician in former Yugoslavia.
And medical school?
A medical school I completed in Belgrade, that's also in former Yugoslavia.
And you said that you were board certified in one of the areas was forensic pathology. Is that correct?
Yes.
How long have you worked as a pathologist?
I worked as a pathologist since 2007.
Okay, so for a little over 10 years, is that correct?
Yes.
And we use that term pathology, and then you also use the term forensic pathology. Can you explain what those terms mean?
Yes. Well, first, medical doctor has to go into the residency training in order to become specialized. So one of the specialties is pathology. It's very broad medical specialty, and more narrow specialties are called fellowships. And so if a pathologist desires to go into a more narrow field, then he would choose a fellowship. And that's what forensic pathology is. It's a fellowship of a general pathology. So general pathology is basically a medical branch that is concerned about etiology or the cause of diseases, and also to establish diagnoses. So that's what pathology is. It's not a therapeutic branch of medicine. Pathology does not treat diseases. It's more about diagnostics and making the right diagnosis on whether the patient is alive or deceased. Forensic pathology is more narrow, and it's concerned about determining the cause and manner of death in medical legal cases.
Now, you said that one of the ways that you go about your work in determining cause and manner of deaths are through the performance of autopsies. Is that correct?
Yes.
And can you estimate approximately how many autopsies you have performed in your career?
Approximately 4,000.
Have you ever testified in court as an expert in forensic pathology?
Yes.
And approximately how many times?
I would say about close to 200 times.
Dr. Bulick, were you working in the medical examiner's office here in St. Augustine on August the 28th of 2015?
Yes, I was.
And did you conduct 2 autopsies on that particular day on 2 individuals who were identified to you as Amanda Colley and Lindy Dobbins?
Yes.
Were there any other law enforcement personnel, other individuals who were present at that autopsy?
Yes, they were.
And were one of those individuals Christine Keegan with the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office?
I believe so, but I would have to look at my report.
Okay.
Or it's written in there.
Do you have it with you, Doctor?
Yes.
Okay, you could do that, please. Thank you.
Yes, she was there.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. Was it your understanding, Dr. Bulick, that both Ms. Colley and Ms. Dobbins were killed the day prior to you conducting your autopsies?
Yes, that was my understanding.
And was your observations of their bodies consistent with that information?
Yes.
So, Dr. Bulick, when we talk about an autopsy, can you kind of explain to us sort of the process of an autopsy? What it is that you, is there a method or a process that you undergo sort of from A to Z when you conduct these types of examinations?
The autopsy is a surgical procedure that is performed by a qualified physician, usually either general pathologist, or if it comes to cases such as murder and homicide, then it has to be the forensic pathologist, not even a general pathologist can do that. And it's always standardized. The procedure is very much standardized so that nothing would be amiss. It usually starts by external observation, photographing, collecting the evidence, then really washing the body thoroughly to remove all kinds of debris or blood, so that the injuries could be also better observed and photographed. And after all that is then the pathologist or forensic pathologist continues with internal observation, which is really cutting the body in a certain way and finding out anything that is wrong with the decedent.
So you had indicated that part of that process is to photograph the body, is that correct?
Yes.
And you do that for every step of the process, is that correct?
That's correct. Very thorough photographs are made at the moment the body bag is opened, and then we proceed in a step manner. Basically, little by little, we are uncovering the evidence.
And were photographs taken during the autopsies of Amanda Colley and Lindy Dobbins?
Yes.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Dr. Bulick, I'm showing you what's been marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit HH1, which is a CD, as well as HH2, which is a printout of the items on that CD. Do you recognize that, sir?
Yes, I do.
All right. And is this a disc containing photographs from the autopsy that you conducted on August the 28th of 2015?
Yes.
You've had an opportunity to review the photographs on this disc?
Yes.
And are the photographs on this disc, as well as in this printout here, fair and accurate depictions of the autopsy that you conducted on that day?
Yes, they are.
Your Honor, at this time, the State would offer States HH1 and HH2 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Without objection, I would receive the State's Autopsy Exhibit 37.
Dr. Bulick, between Amanda Colley and Lindy Dobbins, which autopsy did you conduct first?
I conducted Ms. Dobbins first. I'm sorry, I said that wrong.
Okay.
Actually, it was looking at the time. I conducted Ms. Colley first at 10 o'clock on the 28th, August the 28th.
Yes, sir.
And that took about 4 hours to complete. And then the second autopsy was Ms. Dobbins started at 2 o'clock p.m.
Thank you, Doctor. Was the body of Amanda Colley clothed when you first received it?
I'm sorry, was it what?
Was the body of Amanda Colley clothed when you first observed it?
Yes.
Okay. And what was she wearing when you received her body?
She had a T-shirt. She had a bra. There was also some type of sport tights. Like a yoga pants, but not full length. It was, I think it's somewhere like up to the knees. And may I look to see what
Yes,
what
sir.
else is
Yes, sir.
was present? So she had on, and also flip-flops.
Okay.
And that's it.
Okay. Were these items removed from Ms. Colley and turned over to Chris Keegan with the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office?
Yes.
Now, Dr. Bulick, I want to take you, so we're going to start with the autopsy on Amanda Colley. I want to take you to photograph A, and can you tell us basically what this is a photograph of here?
Yeah, I see just basically the face and the neck of the victim, Miss Collins, and also there's an identification number that we assign to the case.
And photograph B, what are we looking at here?
On this photograph, we see the head and upper portion of the body with arms that are also covered with paper bags to preserve the evidence, and also the lower portion of the body, with mostly just the pelvis and the legs.
Right, and we see she has clothing on here. These are the same clothing that you were referring to earlier.
That's correct.
And is this, I see it appears that she's in a blue body bag. Is that correct?
Yes, this is the body bag that the transport service uses to transport the body.
Okay, and this is really to depict exactly how she appeared to you upon opening the body bag. Is that right?
Yes, the bags, the body bags are always sealed, and we have to break the seal in order to see the body the way then we photograph it right away. So these photographs are the very first look that we had, just the way it appeared to us when the body bag was opened.
And you've already indicated that the clothing was removed. It was turned over to the sheriff's office. After the clothing was removed, did you observe any evidence of injuries to Amanda Colley's body?
Yes, after the collection of the evidence and disrobing or removing the clothing, then we also washed the residual blood that was covering the body. Then we were able to observe a number of gunshot wounds on the body.
Okay. I'm showing you photograph C from this presentation. What does this, and there's also a photograph, an inset photograph within that larger one. Can you tell us what we're looking at in this photograph here?
We're looking at almost the entire victim's body with multiple gunshot wounds that are labeled with the legs.
Okay. Dr. Bulick, how many individual gunshot wounds, and when we're talking about gunshot wounds that are traceable to a single gunshot were found on Amanda Colley's body?
There were a total of 9.
Now, we just to kind of differentiate and so that everybody understands, is it true that there were more than 9 wounds, but these were 9 wounds that were traceable to 9 different gunshots?
That's correct. There's some entrances and exits, but that counts as 1. So total of 9 gunshot wounds. There will be more if we count also entrances and exits. So some bullets did not exit, so there will be just 1 wound, single wound. But if there's an entrance and exit, then there will be 2. However, we don't count the exits, so we just count the 9 gunshots received.
Did you also have injuries where there was an entrance and exit and a re-entrance wound?
Yes.
Now I want to take you, in this photograph here, we see sort of the constellation of injuries to her body. I'd like to take you through a lot of these individually. First, I want to ask you, are you able to determine the exact sequence individually of each of these shots?
Forensic pathology is not, at this point, is not able to determine the order in which the wounds are received, and so this is it's basically impossible scientifically to determine that. However, there are some certain instances where certain trajectories and the paths of the projectile through the body can imply a certain order. For example, if the bullet passed through the spinal cord and it would render a person paralyzed, then it would not be received prior defensive injuries on the hands and and legs, which means that if the person was rendered paralyzed, we would say, well, that wound was received after all the injuries to the hands and legs, because that person was still able to defend themselves by putting the extremities in front of the weapon. So we know that at that point, the injuries to the hands and legs were received first. So in that kind of logic, we can actually extrapolate and scientifically guess which is the order of the wounds, but not for every single wound.
Okay. And so there's some groupings of these gunshots that you are able to determine by process of deduction occurred before others. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I'd like to start with what appears on the screen as photograph D. There also appears to be a marker next to a wound that's also marked D. Is that correct?
Yes.
Can you tell us, Dr. Bulick, what, I know there's a little bit difficult maybe from, just because it's a zoomed-in shot, can you tell us what part of the body of Amanda Colley this injury is located? First, tell us what kind of injury it is, and then tell us where it's located on her body.
Should I stand up?
You may, and there's actually a pointer there. You can extend it out however long you need it, doctor.
So this is the gunshot we labeled with the letter D. The belly button is here, is covered with a ruler. So in order to orient the jury to the where is the location of that wound, this is the entire thing is abdomen with the belly button in the.
Sorry.
We can actually go to the.
Okay. Go back to the C.
So which I can point this wound. Actually, it's right here. So you can see where the belly button is, and the wound is on the right side of the somewhere in the middle of the abdomen. So this is abdomen, in the middle of the abdomen. And we can go back to the larger one.
All right. Going back to photograph D, doctor, did you have anything else you wanted to point out?
Just wanted to show that that's a typical circular entrance. It's punched in, and it shows a little bit of abrasion, and the abrasion is a little bit wider on this side than on that side. So it means the bullet was coming in a downward direction.
Okay. And doctor, is it part of the process when you observe these wounds, gunshot wounds in this particular example, that you would measure the wound to determine its diameter?
Yes, we always measure the diameter of any injury. The size of the wound is telling.
Okay. And what was the diameter of this wound here, pictured in photograph D?
I believe it was 0.6 centimeters, and that's had to be translated in inches, or
that's sufficient.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you,
0.6 centimeters.
Thank you, sir. Was there any evidence, Dr. Bulick, that there was that this gunshot wound occurred from a close distance?
This is a distant range wound because it lacks the evidence of contact or close range. When we determined the range of the gunshot wound, we have those three categories. One is the contact, which is very different than anything else. It has a lot of searing, a lot of soot, and sometimes there's a muzzle imprint on the skin. So it's like you can never mistake the contact from anything else. Then there is a close range, which has a lot of stippling or powder tattooing on the skin. So it's a lot of dots that are basically burn particles emerging from the muzzle and burning the skin. The hot burning particles coming from the muzzle would literally tattoo the skin in the form of multiple dots. So that's the characteristic of close-range firing. That's usually between a few inches up to about 2 feet distance. That's considered close-range firing. And then anything above 2 to 3 feet is distant range, or it could be 15 yards, or it could be 3 feet. We cannot distinguish the distance.
Doctor, would clothing have the effect of preventing that stippling, as you were indicating, there would be evidence of a close-range gunshot? Would that have the effect of preventing some of that material from tattooing the skin, as you described?
Clothing would prevent or filter out the stippling, or that cloud of hot gas coming out and hitting the skin, causing the stippling, would be filtered out. And the contact range could never be filtered out. That would be always seen, even if somebody's shot through the clothing. However, the close range would be diminished in appearance. It could appear as distant.
Right. And with regard to all these injuries, just so I don't have to ask you the question with each one, was there any evidence on any of the injuries of a contact or close distance range?
No, I have not seen any evidence of that.
When the bullet, were you able to determine sort of the track of the wound here as it entered the skin and kind of where it went from there?
Yes.
And what kind of damage it did internally?
Yes, we always determine that every gunshot is, depending on what the location of the bullet was recovered or if it passed through the body, we always follow from the entrance to the exit. We would follow the track and determine the direction of the projectile and also all injuries that were associated with that projectile.
Okay, let's talk first about the track. Was there also an exit wound associated with this wound here?
This one exited on the back.
Okay, and were you able to determine the track as it passed through the body? Was it up, down, left, right? Were you able to determine that as you observed those injuries?
I was.
And what did you determine, Doctor?
So the track we call basically all the organs that we can line up and where the projectile passed through. That's the track. The direction of the projectile is whether it's going upward, downward, left or right.
Okay.
And so in terms of direction, the projectile was traveling from right to left and slightly downward and also front to back.
Okay. And you're able to determine that how? In terms of slightly downward, how do you make the determination of that?
Well, if you measure the position of this entrance from the top of the head and then position of the exit from the same top of the head, then you will see that the exit was lower than the entrance. So that means the projectile is traveling through the body downward.
Okay. And what was the difference between the entrance wound and the exit wound in terms of distance from the top of the head?
We'll have to look that up.
Yes, sir. You please do.
So the projectile entered the body at the level of 65 centimeters below the top of the head. And it exited the body at the level of 66 centimeters below the top of the head. So the difference is only 1 centimeter lower.
Okay.
So if the entrance is, as we see, is right here, then the exit on the back would be 1 centimeter lower which is 1 centimeter is here, this much from here to here. So the exit will be approximately this long. However, on the opposite side of the back, so which is the left side. This is the right side, it's the left side on the back.
So when you say it was downward, it's only slightly downward?
Slightly down.
Okay, almost horizontal.
Almost horizontal, yes.
Would that be consistent with, assuming that the shooter is standing up, would that be consistent with the victim standing up at the time that they were shot?
Yes, most likely scenario, because we see other projectiles going at the very steep angles, which that means that there was a change in the position of the body. But if the victim is facing the shooter by standing, most likely the entrances will be perpendicular to the body. There could be slight upward or downward angle depending on because shooting is never static. It's a very dynamic scene where both bodies are moving at the same time, and so there's always certain angles, whether it's downward or upward or left or right. But generally speaking, this would be almost perpendicular entrance. However, there was a angle to that entrance, which is from right to left, and the exit was on the left side of the back. So it's not like this straight perpendicular, but it was at the angle, and the exit was on the opposite side.
But it passed through her body almost at a horizontal angle. Is that correct?
Correct.
I want to go to photograph E here, and can you tell us what we're looking at there?
This photograph shows the exit that we were talking about of this same wound. It's on the left side. This is the left hip. And the exit is ragged. You can definitely recognize the exit as not being circle and not being punched in, but more like the bullet is tumbling through the body and coming out and tearing the skin, forming this like a star-shaped laceration. All right.
And Dr. Bulick, you conducted an internal examination on Amanda Colley as well as the external that we're sort of going over now, correct?
Yes.
Were you able to determine what injuries she suffered internally as a result of this gunshot wound?
So the projectile passed through the abdominal wall and grazed the liver, the lower edge of the liver. Then it passed through the bowels, the small bowel loops. We have many of them, and it passed through several loops. And then the projectile continued to pass into the muscle on the back and then exited.
How would you describe these injuries in terms of lethality? Was this injury lethal? If so, was it immediately lethal? If not, how long? How would you describe it?
So this is a gut shot, basically, and the big danger is it's more of an infection at a later time, such as if there is a bowel perforation, there's a content of the bowel which is spilled out and cause sepsis or infection. That the person can die unless it's being surgically operated on, and then those bowel loops that are being perforated are being stitched up, and also a lot of antibiotics. So to answer that question, there's nothing immediately lethal in this wound. However, there's a danger for another 24 hours, 48 hours sepsis.
Let me go to photograph F here, and this it's photograph F, but you have a marker there indicating a gunshot wound B. Can you tell us what we're looking at in this photograph?
So this is one of those injuries that I would classify as defensive injuries, because the victim raised the hand in front of the vital part of the body. So the left hand was raised this way, covering the breast, or the vital part where the heart is. And then the projectile entered the forearm, which is right here, and exited through the fleshy part of the forearm. So entrance, exit, and then re-entrance into the breast.
And what was the direction of this gunshot wound?
The direction is obviously front to back, and then also, curiously, that was a downward direction. So it was going downward through the body. After re-entered, it went down. So the entrance was through the arm, through the forearm, the soft tissue of the forearm that re-entered. However, it was at the downward angle. So either the shooter will have to be like higher, or the victim was bending. So then you would create that downward trajectory, and most likely that's the answer why it's going downward. Because in instances where they're shooting, usually the victim twists or bends in order to decrease the size of themselves being a target. So they either minimize the size by twisting or bending in order to protect the vital parts.
Was there an exit wound associated with this gunshot?
There is no exit wound. The projectile was recovered inside the body.
Okay. And go to photograph G here. What are we looking at here in this photograph, doctor?
This is the X-ray or radiograph of the torso. We see the wires from the bra here, so that can orient you from saying that. So these are the breasts here, the ribs and the spinal column, and here's the projectile in a circle, the metallic projectile that is seen on the X-ray.
Okay. And was that projectile, were you able to remove that from Amanda Colley's body?
Yes.
And was that turned over to the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office?
Yes.
What can you tell us, Dr. Bulick, in terms of the lethality of this gunshot wound?
So we know that the entrance, we saw the entrance, or should I call it re-entrance, after it passed through the forearm. It re-entered the breast, the left breast, and then it traveled to where it received. So along this path, there's several important organs, such as the chest cavities here. Then the diaphragm is right here. So it passed through the diaphragm, entered the abdomen, and passed through the liver, also the stomach. Then the upper pole of the kidney on the left side. We have two kidneys, right and left. So kidney is approximately here. So it passed through the kidney, and then it was lodged on the back, just under the skin.
Okay. Like the first gunshot wound that we talked about, was that also not immediately lethal?
This is not immediately lethal because it's passing through. Every time there's a immediately incapacitating or even rapidly lethal wound, would have to pass through the vital organs such as brain, heart, or big vessel, like the largest artery in the body is aorta. It passed through the aorta, then you would just immediately drop. Or passing through the heart or brain. So this wound is not rapidly lethal.
Okay. It would be lethal at some point in time, though. Is that correct?
At some point, because it passed through the liver, so there will be a hemorrhage. Liver is very vascular, has a lot of vessels, and that it can bleed intra-abdominally unless it's stitched up. Also, there is the stomach content was spilled through a bullet passed through the stomach, and that can be also, it's not sterile, so it would cause sepsis as well. So it would eventually, like 24, 48 hours, it will cause death if there is no medical assistance.
Is it a survivable wound?
Yes.
I'm going to go to the next photograph, which is photograph H. Is this the bullet that we saw in the X-ray in the previous photograph?
That's correct. This is the deformed projectile. You see a copper jacket that is bunched up, and also the core lead projectile, which is in the center.
Thank you. I'm going to go to photograph I, Dr. Bulick. Can you tell us what we are looking at in this photograph?
We labeled this wound as A. Again, that was arbitrary labeling because it's not in the order that we think that this occurred. The location is this is the breast tissue here. We see a little bit of imprint from the bra, and so this is the right breast here, and at the base of the right breast, towards the middle, where the breastplate is there's a gunshot wound.
Okay. And real quickly, you pointed out the imprint from the bra. Can you explain how that would be caused?
Anything like if the person was clothed in a certain material that is a little harsher, such as like wires in the bra or something, or like if a person has something in the pocket, such as a watch or anything else metallic, it would, because of the proximity of the projectile entering the body, it's so-called a percussive effect of the bullet on the body. So these hard objects on the skin would leave imprint because of the kinetic energy on the projectile. In the proximity of that hard object would cause the imprint of that object on the skin.
Okay, thank you, doctor. All right, returning to our discussion about the gunshot wound there that's labeled A on photograph I. Can you tell us, what can you tell us about that wound there, doctor?
We see a classic entrance, punched in, circular, with an abrasion ring around, which is pretty much in almost in all directions, kind of equal, maybe wider on this side, but that's because of the breast tissue is raising right at this point. It's raising upward, so it's causing a little more abrasion here. This is the basically, if you're interested in the direction and the track.
I will, and let me just ask you, okay, just to clarify, is this an entrance wound or an exit wound?
This is an entrance.
Okay, was there an exit wound associated with this gunshot wound?
There is an exit as well on the back.
Okay. I'm going to go to photograph J. Can you tell us, is this the exit wound here?
This is the exit wound that is associated with the wound that we just saw. It's also on the right side of the back, approximately at the same level.
Okay, when you say the same level, what do you mean?
I would have to look up exactly whether it's upward or downward, but it approximately almost horizontally traveling through the right side of the chest. Okay,
and so just to kind of follow up on that, similar to my question with regard to the other gunshot wound that you indicated had passed almost horizontal, would that also be consistent with the victim standing facing the shooter, assuming that the shooter was also standing?
Yes, it is.
And what can you tell us, Dr. Buick, in terms of the lethality of this shot?
This projectile passed through the right side of the chest, just slightly inside of the breast, and continued to travel through the lung, and then exited on the back. So the only vital organ is the right lung, which is it's a very important organ for breathing. So it would cause such a gunshot wound would cause the lungs to collapse, and there was also hemorrhage in the lungs, which is then associated with difficulty to breathe, which could double because the lungs collapse. So it's not immediately a lethal shot. However, this needs to be acted really fast. If it's the only shot received, within half an hour, the patient can die.
Okay. If, assuming it was the only gunshot that the victim had suffered and they did receive treatment within that half hour, would it have been a survivable shot?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. I want to go to the next photograph, which is photograph K. What are we looking at in photograph K?
We are looking at a wound that was received on the left palm, right under the thumb, or at the base of the left thumb. This is the entrance wound, and you see the thumb here and the rest of the fingers.
And going to photo L, what are we looking at here?
We see the exit of the same wound. So the entrance was somewhere right here, and the exit was on the opposite side of the tongue, on the back of the tongue. So that entrance was approximately here at the base of the left tongue, and it exited on the back of the tongue. In the process, it fractured the joint, so the joint was completely lax and detached. I would consider that as another defensive wound, because the victim is usually, as being shot at, would put hands in front of the weapon to protect the rest of the body. And it's, again, distant range because there was no soot or stippling on the skin.
All right, moving to photograph M. Is this just another photograph of that same injury?
This is the same injury, just the exit, and showing the joint, the cartilage here, that basically detached from the rest of the tongue.
Moving to photograph N, can you kind of orient us on what part of the body this is on Amanda Colley and what we're looking at in the photograph?
So, this is the right lower thigh. The knee is approximately here, or approximately here. The feet are this way, and the rest of the thigh is this way. So this is the right side of the lower thigh, right just above the knee. This I consider, again, another defensive injury where the person would lift either arms or legs or knees to protect the body, the vital parts of the body from injury.
And going to photograph O, do we see that same injury in this photograph here?
We just saw that wound, just a larger magnification previously, and that's the same wound right here. So you can see better now that this is the right leg. The knee is right here, and we see the entrance, typical entrance wound without evidence of contact or close range firing, and we see the exit wound of the same projectile. The projectile passed through the soft tissue only, not through the bone or any major vessel.
Okay. Okay. And moving to photograph P, is this that same exit wound that you were just pointing out?
That's a larger view of the same exit wound.
And then photograph Q, can you tell us kind of what we're looking at here? What was the purpose of this?
Here is just one of many photographs that we demonstrate the path of the projectile through the certain parts of the body, such as in this case, we put a probe through the tract, showing that it's only soft tissue wound. If there was a bone in the path or even fractured bone, we would not be able to put a probe in. So it's just a soft tissue injury.
Okay. Now, doctor, you described these wounds as defensive in nature. I think you described, the Colley putting sort of her leg up to sort of protect herself, at least an attempt to protect herself. What would be the natural explanation for, where she's at, standing up, laying down, in order to position herself in a way where these gunshots would have entered her body in the way that they did?
So in this case, we see three almost parallel gunshots that are passing through the leg, and the entrances are on the side of the right leg, and this is just a graze, just the skin and fat under the skin, and this one passed through the actual entire knee, through the joint. But just looking at the tracks and directions, the directionality of the wound, of these three wounds, show that implies the position of the raised knee across the body. And if that happened, that scenario, the only explanation is if she was sitting and having her knee raised across her vital parts.
Sitting or laying down?
Either sitting or laying down, yes.
All right, and let me just, before I start having you talk about this next photograph, with regard to the gunshot wound to the hand that you had pointed out before, and all of these gunshot wounds to Amanda Colley's right leg, were any of those lethal?
Is any of them
were any of those gunshot wounds, either to her hand or to her legs, her right leg, were any of those lethal?
No, that's very obvious. There is not. Just passing through, they passed through the thumb. One of them passed through the thumb, and the three wounds passed through the soft tissue and the knee. So none of them are lethal.
Okay, thank you, doctor. And okay, now here on photograph R, I think we saw the same injury in the previous photo, but this is a close-up of that graze wound. Is that correct?
Yes, and it's just here is a different orientation. So the entrance is really here, and this is a graze wound. The bullet was traveling from here and just grazing the skin, and then continued to travel. So it's a minimal wound, basically you can call it scratch.
All right, moving here to photograph S. Can you tell us what we're looking at in this photograph?
This is the entrance wound under the right knee, on the side of the right knee. It's going upward, we can tell because there's an abrasion at 6 o'clock, and it's traveling this way.
And was there an exit wound associated with this gunshot wound?
There's an exit associated with this one, and it's on the opposite side of the knee, slightly above the knee. So the projectile goes through the knee joint.
And photograph T here, this gives you sort of more of an orientation of where that gunshot wound is located. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the wound that we were discussing previously, and we don't see the exit, but it's on the opposite side of that knee.
And photograph U, what is this?
That's the exit wound on the opposite side of the same leg.
All right, moving to photograph V, can you tell us what portion of Amanda Colley's body this is and what we're looking at?
This is an entrance wound. It's labeled C.
Okay. And what part of her, Amanda Colley's body, was this gunshot wound found on?
I believe that this, since we see there is a little bit of breast tissue here, this is in the abdomen.
And can you tell us, Dr. Bulick, in terms of the direction of travel first, before I ask you that question, let me ask you this. Was there an exit wound associated with this gunshot wound?
No, there's no exit wound. We recovered the projectile in the body.
Okay. Were you able to determine the direction of travel as the projectile passed through Amanda Colley's body after it entered in this location?
Yes, I did.
Okay. What was the direction of that gunshot wound?
So just by looking at the wound, since it's elongated, it would tell you that the entrance is not perpendicular like this. If the entrance is this way, then you would have really punched in a hole that is actually round. However, we are seeing here elongated wounds. So that means there was a steep angle of the projectile traveling and hitting the body. So the best is to explain this is looking at this abrasion here, and then finally entrance. The projectile traveled from 6 o'clock towards 12 o'clock, and on my body will be this basically a very steep upward angle for the body.
Okay. What would that indicate to you? You said it was a very steep upward angle. What would that indicate to you, doctor, in terms of positioning of the victim and the shooter?
So the only explanation to that is that the victim was down, almost horizontal.
As if she was on the floor or the ground?
Yes.
What type of injuries did you find internally, and how would you describe the lethality of this shot?
So the projectile traveled upward. This is the upper abdomen, and right under the skin is liver. So it passed through the liver and then continued to travel upward into the chest cavity, hitting the right lung, and passed through the lung. There are 3 lobes of the lung passed through the at least 2 lobes of the lung. So it's a long travel through the lungs. And then also, I believe it was the 5th rib on the back was fractured. So that's where the projectile hit that rib, and it got lodged in the soft tissue on the back, but it's in the upper back. So from the entrance here to the projectile was found up here. So it's a steep upward angle.
Okay. And in terms of how lethal this shot was, how would you describe that?
It's a pretty serious injury. I'd say the liver was shot and lacerated by the projectile, which would cause a lot of bleeding, and the lung was also shot through, so that would cause another additional bleeding. So I would say if it's received by just alone with no other wounds, it would be not immediately lethal. However, there will be a real danger of losing a lot of blood relatively quickly. So I'm not certain that it's survivable, because it's 2 vital organs were shot through and lacerated. So it would, by the time EMS, or like if this is the only wound, and by the time EMS arrives and they stabilize the patient and get him to ER, it would be it'll be maybe too long.
But in terms of immediacy, this was not an immediately lethal wound, is that correct?
Not immediately. As I said, only brain or large vessel or heart would cause that.
I want to go to photograph W, Dr. Bulick, and what are we looking at here in this photograph?
We are looking at the circle projectile that was found. We were discussing that, just the upward angle of traveling and where the projectile was found on the upper back. And that's how it appeared to us on the X-ray. So it was in the back of the soft tissue that was identified.
Right. And photograph X, is this the projectile that was removed from her at that location?
Yes, that's the projectile that we labeled letter C.
And moving to photograph Y, can you tell us what we're looking at in this photograph?
We see another gunshot entrance wound, and I would classify this as a defensive injury again because it's on the it entered below the wrist and then exited above the wrist on the opposite side.
And photograph double A, what is this injury here, this picture?
That's a re-entry. So the decedent had that's why I said that it was defensive injury, because decedent had an arm up here, and the projectile passed through the right hand below the wrist, exited above the wrist, and then entered the neck.
And was there a exit wound associated with this gunshot wound?
So there's an exit on the opposite side of the neck. It's high up in the neck. This is the ear, so it's towards the back of the neck and high up.
What was the direction of travel on this gunshot wound, doctor?
It was front to back and also right to left and upward.
Okay. In terms of the injuries that this gunshot wound caused to Amanda Colley's body, could you describe those injuries?
This is immediately lethal. Even though it passed through the wrist, the right wrist, that's not lethal. However, it re-entered into the neck and then passed through the carotid artery, the right carotid artery, which is a very thick, maybe a finger, a thick artery that delivers a lot of blood to the brain. So that if that's severed, the death is rapid. Then, however, there's more to it. The projectile also passed through the spinal cord and severed the spinal cord. So at that point, the victim would be paralyzed from the neck down.
Okay, so she would essentially, assuming that she had survived these multitude of injuries, she would have been a quadriplegic. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what impact would that have had on her ability to raise her legs, put her arms up in order to defend herself in any way?
So we know that she would not be able to do that if we think that that's the wound that came first. She would not be able to lift her arms or knee up to protect herself.
Okay. And she also, doctor, she would not also be able to stand, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So with regard to the gunshot wounds that indicate that she was standing at the time that she received them, and the gunshot wounds that indicate that she was at least making some efforts to defend herself with her legs and hands, those all would have had to have come before this gunshot wound here. Is that correct?
Yes, I agree with that.
In terms of these gunshot wounds, particularly the defensive injuries, what do those injuries tell us in terms of Amanda Colley's consciousness throughout her receiving these gunshot wounds?
She was aware. She had knowledge of what's happening, and through the entire shooting process.
Okay. In terms of physical pain, what kind of physical pain would she have been suffering as a result of any of these gunshot wounds?
Well, we know that the skin has a lot of pain receptors, so anything that causes damage to the skin would cause pain. Deeper organs have much less pain receptors. So, however, in order to get to the damage that is caused by the deeper organs, such as liver, lungs, or even abdominal organs and bowels, they would not be as painful, but in order to get to them, the projectile goes through the skin. So it would be hurting.
What about the gunshot wounds, the projectiles as they pass through? I know you said the ones that passed through the hand went through the thumb joint. The ones the one that went through the knee went through her knee joint. Some of the ones to her torso struck and fractured ribs. What about injuries to bones and things like that? Would those have caused pain and suffering?
Yes, those are especially cartilage, and the joints would cause pain because they have pain receptors. So most of these defensive injuries would be very painful. Also, the gut shot is painful because the bowels have a lot of pain receptors, especially stretching or tearing would cause pain.
Dr. Bulick, were you able to, and you can take your seat again, thank you, for at least a few moments. Dr. Bulick, were you able to determine the cause of Amanda Colley's death as a result of your autopsy?
Yes,
And what was the cause of her death?
multiple gunshot wounds.
And were you able to determine the manner of her death?
Yes,
And what was the manner of her death?
homicide.
And when we use the word homicide, does that mean her death was caused by another human being?
That's exactly right. It's the death that is caused by another person. We don't have any other implication to that. We have courts and judicial system to decide the guilt or even to call it a homicide. But this is a conventional for medical examiners. Any death that is caused by another human being would be called homicide.
All right, thank you, Dr. Bulick. I'd like to move on to your autopsy of Lindy Dobbins. And I think you
Stop
indicated
here one second. Everybody else, you're okay? Everybody great. Good. Okay, let's keep going, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Your Honor. I think you had indicated earlier that you had performed Lindy Dobbins' autopsy later that afternoon, the same day that you conducted Amanda Colley's autopsy. Is that correct?
Yes.
Was Lindy Dobbins' body clothed at the time that you received it?
Yes, she was.
Okay, and at some point was her clothing removed and turned over to the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office?
Yes, the same protocol applies to every victim.
Okay. Did you notice anything unusual about her clothing, doctor? Did they have any defects or anything of that nature?
I would have to look up regarding clothing, but I remember she had a certain gunshot wounds that were not covered by clothing. I'm just not sure about the shoulder gunshot wound, whether that passed through the T-shirt.
Okay, would you check your, check your report and your notes, Doctor?
No, there was no projectile passed through any clothing item.
All right, I'd like to move to photograph double C. Can you tell us, Dr. Bulick, what we're looking at here?
We are looking at the face of the deceased victim.
All right. And did you observe any injuries to the body of Lindy Dobbins when you began her autopsy and removed her clothing?
Yes.
And what kind of injuries did you observe to her body?
She had 3 gunshot wounds.
Okay, and where were they located?
One was on the right temple. Second one was on the right shoulder, and the third one was on the left foot.
I want to go to photo DD. Can you tell us what we're looking at in this photograph, sir?
This is the photograph of the decedent when we just opened the bag at that time, and then we snapped those photographs of the top portion of the body and the rest of the body.
All right. And this is Lindy Dobbins as she was received at the medical examiner's office. Is that correct?
Yes.
I want to go to photograph EE. And can you tell us what we're looking at in this photograph, Doctor?
We see the.
You stand up? Yes, sir, you can.
We see the area where she was shot. This is the left foot, and the entrance wound is at the base of the great toe.
And was that an entrance wound or an exit wound?
That's an entrance wound.
And was there an exit wound associated with this injury?
There is also there's an exit wound on the opposite side. So at the side of the sole of the foot. So if the entrance was up here at where the great toe is, the top of the great toe. I mean, not the top of the great toe, the base of the great toe, but on the dorsal side, and that's the plantar side of the left foot where the exit is.
And while we're here, can you just tell the members of the jury, what damage did this gunshot wound cause internally to this foot?
The projectile traveled basically from the base of the great toe to the side of the foot and fractured the bones along the path. And those are four toes. The 5th toe was not fractured, so all 4 toes were fractured by the projectile.
Going here to photograph double G, what area of this is on Lindy Dobbins as we're looking at, and what injuries did you observe here?
So this is the right shoulder gunshot wound entrance. We see the head there, and basically the beginning of the arm. That's the shoulder, somewhere in between the end of the shoulder and the neck, so almost in the middle of the shoulder.
And was there an exit wound associated with this gunshot wound?
There is no exit wound. We recovered the bullet within the body. I just want to mentioned there's a abrasion that is showing. If this is the right side, that's the left side. So there's more abrasion on the right, so which indicates the direction of the projectile from right to left and downward.
Okay. Right to left and downward.
Yes.
And what would that indicate to you, doctor, if this is at the shoulder level and it is going downward? What would that indicate to you?
So it's interesting that it's actually also very steep downward track and diagonal across the body. So that's so literally it's traveling like this towards the opposite side of the body and downward. But when we say downward, we mean in regard to the victim, not in regard to the photograph that we are looking at.
Okay. Would that be consistent with her being shot while she is on the floor in a downward angle?
So since this is very steep downward, it's consistent with a shooter being above the victim, literally, and it's quite steep. So the shooter would have to be like right above the victim.
Moving here to double H, what are we looking at in this photograph, doctor?
So this is the X-ray of the torso, the chest. We see a faint outline of the ribs. This is the right side of the chest, left side of the chest. We see the wires from the bra. And there's a projectile that was associated with that entrance wound that we see in the right shoulder. So we can actually see now the downward path. So right to left and downward.
Thank you, doctor. All right, moving here to photograph double I.
I'm sorry. We didn't talk about the lethality of the injury.
Okay, yes, we'll go back. Yes, I'd like to ask you that question. What can you tell us about the lethality of this injury?
This is a rapidly lethal injury. And the reason for that is the projectile passed through the shoulder, but then it entered the lung. It fractured the collarbone, which is not that, it's painful, however, it's not lethal. And then the projectile passed through the lung, then passed through the windpipe in the middle, then also passed through the aorta. And aorta is the largest artery in the human body. So anything that damages the aorta, such as a bullet or knife, would cause immediate drop of blood pressure, and the person would lose consciousness within a couple of minutes. And then the projectile also passed through the other lung, and it was recovered on the soft tissue on the side of the body.
And that projectile was recovered from the body and also turned over to the sheriff's office?
Correct.
And photograph double I, what are we looking at here?
This is a gunshot wound to the right temple, and this is immediately lethal injury. It's passing through the brain, causing immediate loss of consciousness. And it's also going steeply downward. It's passing through, so the entrance is the right temple, and it's a downward angle, would pass through the right hemisphere of the brain, and then would pass through the back of the mouth, and it would exit on the opposite side of the neck.
And moving here to, I think this actually probably was accidentally also labeled double I, but it's the second of those photographs. What are we looking at in that photograph?
This is the exit wound of that temple wound that we just saw. So the entrance is on the opposite temple, so like around here, but on the opposite side. So this is an exit on the left side of the neck.
here, double J, this is just simply a close-up of that same exit wound?
Yes.
And photograph double L, is this the bullet that was, we had previously talked about that was found associated with a gunshot wound to the shoulder?
Yes, that's correct. That's the bullet that was retrieved on the side of the left side of the torso.
All right, and just one more photograph here, double M. What are we looking at here, Dr. Bulick?
This is the X-ray of the head. We were looking at whether an entire bullet passed through and exited on the opposite side of the neck, or there were some still fragments remaining, and there were some along the path. There were some fragments of basically it was a copper jacket, but not entire, just small pieces of copper jacket, but sheared off along the path.
And were those fragments also removed and turned over with the other projectiles to the sheriff's office?
Yes, they were.
Can I have one more, Your Honor?
Sure.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Mr. Shoemaker, do you have cross-examination?
Very quickly, Your Honor. Doctor, as far as the order and the two wounds on Lindy Dobbins, can you tell which was first, whether the one in the temple or the one in the shoulder?
Not possible to really determine. In general terms, usually this happens, the shooting usually happens in a rapid succession, so which one came first is very hard to tell. And if it happened within seconds, then we would not be able to tell. But if it happened with a delay, then I would say that since both are lethal, then would cause like a really quick collapse of the individual. So if the gunshot wound to the temple came first, that person would immediately drop. Then I think the second wound to the shoulder would be harder to make in that kind of to create that kind of direction through the body.
What if the person was already crouched down in that position and never changed positions? Then both could happen simultaneously like that?
It's possible, yeah. So I would not be comfortable to say that this is really which one came first.
And if the gunshot wound to the temple was the first one, it would have been immediate death and no suffering at all, correct?
Correct, yes.
As far as the distance, both of those shots were considered distant shots, is that correct?
I believe so. Just there was a lack of evidence for contact or close range.
May I have 1 second here?
Sure.
We're done here.
Yeah, redirect.
Just very briefly, Your Honor. Dr. Bulick, Mr. Shoemaker was asking you about these gunshot wounds to Lindy Dobbins being at distance range. Would the clothing, say for example the shirt that she was wearing and the hair that was on her head, could that have concealed any evidence of close range gunshot?
So the clothing is if there's a hole on the shirt regarding the shoulder gunshot wound, then it's possible that clothing can filter out some of the evidence. And the temple, there's no clothing. However, there's a hair, so the hair can also filter out some of that. But we would see some evidence on the ear, because the ear is not covered by hair. So, or the cheek. So there was some stippling on the uncovered areas, the ones that hair does not cover. So I would say less likely that there was close or contact range.
Okay. So it would have some effect, is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any recross?
No, Your Honor.
Yes, Dr. Bulick, excused.
I want to retain him, but he's free to go about his business, Your Honor.
You are subject to recall. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and take our minute afternoon recess at this point. It's 25 minutes till 3. Let's be ready to come back at 5 minutes till 3. discuss the case among yourselves. be seated in the courtroom. All that good break, a little stretch. We are ready to proceed. Good afternoon. So state you call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state would call Detective Samantha English.
Take the witness stand right here. We're going to stand when you get there.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Take a seat. Just not being required.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Detective. If you would, introduce yourself to the jury and let them know how you are employed.
Sure. My name is Detective Corporal Samantha English, and I'm employed with the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office
And how long have you been employed at the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office?
for 11 years.
And what are your current duties at the Sheriff's Office?
I am one of the 2 corporals in the Major Crimes Unit.
And can you explain the Major Crimes Unit, how it's set up, things like that?
Sure. We work in a team concept, so we have 2 sergeants, 2 corporals, 8 detectives, and we're split into teams and we work in tandem with each other.
And how long have you been in the Major Crimes Unit?
I've been in Major Crimes for almost 4 years.
Prior to Major Crimes, do you have any other detective experience?
Yes, I was a detective in property crimes in the Northwest District for about a year before Major Crimes.
And your role in this case, State of Florida versus James Colley, how would you describe your role versus other detectives in your division?
Sure, I was assigned as the lead investigator case agent.
And how is that role different, if it is, from the other supporting detectives?
So the case agent is responsible as a whole for the case, collecting everything from beginning to end, pulling it all together, building a good case and presenting it to the state and seeing it through to prosecution.
And you were working in this capacity back on August 27th, 2015?
I was.
And do you recall what day of the week that was?
A Thursday.
Did you get a call that Thursday morning to respond in relation to a shooting?
I did.
And, approximately what time and what happened after you received that call?
Sure, so I was actually at a separate homicide scene, and it was about 10:45, and Lieutenant Cole contacted me and advised that we had a shooting in Marabella and asked me to respond, so I did.
And you responded pretty quickly thereafter?
I did. I responded lights and sirens.
Okay. And what did you see? What were the activities that were going on at the house in Marabella when you arrived?
Sure, so there was a large number of patrol deputies there, obviously, and I arrived, I think, probably was the first detective to arrive on scene. I learned that there were 2 deceased females inside the home, and that there was a victim/witness in an adjacent home. So I went over there and made contact with her.
And who was that person?
Rachel Hendricks.
And after you gathered some information from Ms. Hendricks, what did you do with that information, specifically suspect information?
I informed everybody that was on scene what I knew, and we notified our dispatch center, who then started filtering it out to other deputies and local jurisdictions in the area to get a full load, be on the lookout for James Colley and his vehicle.
And what information, did you have a vehicle description at that time that you thought it could potentially be?
Sure, we had a vehicle description of a green Ford truck with a duck head sticker on the back.
Okay. And that information came from which person?
Rachel.
Okay. It's a vehicle that she knew James Colley drove.
Correct.
And shortly after that, did you get some support there at the scene on Bellagio?
Yes, the rest of the unit arrived, as well did other detectives from other units came to assist, district detectives and special victim detectives, they came to assist as well.
Okay. And was it just that location on Bellagio, or did another location become important thereafter?
Correct. So we learned that James was living with his sister Rhonda at 1189 Garrison Drive. So we filtered detectives to both locations to assist.
Okay. So kind of just tell the jurors how it works. Are you conducting every interview? What are the other detectives doing? And
No. So I did conduct a few interviews. I then talked with other detectives. We formulated a plan, And other detectives work in a support aspect. They conduct interviews, collect video evidence, do canvasses, stuff like that. So I didn't conduct every interview. Other people on my team conducted them too.
How does that information make its way back to you?
There's two ways really. We do a round table where we all sit together and brief everything that we've learned thus far. In this case, we couldn't round table because it was two separate scenes, so we did it via phone.
So constantly, fair to say, passing back information.
Constantly.
Between the scenes. Did you actually, you mentioned Rachel Hendricks, did you conduct any other interviews there in that Bellagio area?
I did. I talked to Mike Dickens and Chris Dobbins. Chris Dobbins wasn't an interview. I just informed him that Lindy had been killed.
And Lamar Dubberly was in that area. Did you do his interview or someone else?
I did not. Detective DeLeo did.
And did you learn that there were several members of the defendant's family at a particular location that day?
Yes. So I learned that James's uncle, father, sister, and I believe brother-in-law brother-in-law wasn't there, were at 1189 Garrison. I then learned his mother and the brother-in-law were at the nearby Publix, close to Marabella.
And those persons were interviewed by other members supporting you?
Correct.
Did you come to learn about a particular person, a girlfriend that the defendant had on that day?
Yes, Amy Mason.
And was she interviewed by you or someone else?
Somebody else.
Was James Colley located in St. Johns County immediately after the homicide?
He was not.
Units were looking for him though, is that correct?
Yes, so we'd issued a bolo for him and his truck, and people were actively looking as well as helicopter.
So you kind of described like it's a dynamic scene, many people involved.
Sure.
After that initial information is coming back to you, at some point during that day on the 27th, do you and other members of your unit move to get warrants and things?
Yes, so I drafted a arrest warrant for James for 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder, and now Sergeant, but I think then he was a corporal, Eugene Tolbert, drafted 2 search warrants, one for Bellagio and one for Garrison.
And approximately what time were those warrants obtained?
About 1 o'clock, 1:30.
When an arrest warrant is obtained by someone in your agency, what happens with that information? How does that information get out to law enforcement?
Sure, so we turn it into our warrant section, but then we also turn it into our teletype in our communication center. And they enter it into a law enforcement database called NCIC and FCIC, which goes out to all the law enforcement agencies in the area. In the event that somebody comes across James walking down the street, or any suspect for that matter, walking down the street, or they run a tag, it'll populate on the screen that they have a warrant and to detain them.
Okay. So, and you mentioned some databases, NCIC and FCIC. Is one of those a national as well?
Correct, NCIC.
And so when we hear, on TV and stuff, get pulled over and some law enforcement officers running your license or running your tag, is that what you're referring to?
Correct.
Okay. So they're running that information in a database to see if anyone has warrants?
Correct, it's a check for warrants.
Were you present on the day that, on the 27th, when Bellagio was being processed by crime scene technician Bulmer?
I was.
Okay. Did that process conclude on the 27th?
It did not.
While you were a part of that process into the later evening hours, did there come a time where you learned that James Colley had been arrested?
I did.
And approximately what time and what was his location where he was arrested?
So I learned it was about 10 p.m. that he had been stopped in a car in Norton, Virginia, and was subsequently arrested.
And what did you do and others in response to getting that information?
Immediately left and drove to Norton, Virginia.
And who went?
Myself, then, now Sergeant Tolbert, and Sergeant Russ Martin.
And when you're going up there, are you communicating with law enforcement officers in that county area?
Yes, so I made contact with the officers that stopped him, as well as the Wise County Sheriff's Office, asked that they secure the vehicle and start working on a warrant to obtain his DNA, his clothing, and to process the vehicle.
And so you left late that night, it sounds like?
Yes.
Okay. Drive
Through the night, correct. And we arrived, we left, well, we learned at 10, so we left shortly after. We arrived at about 9 the next morning and went straight to the sheriff's office and started working on things.
And were you present for the search of a vehicle there in Virginia?
I was present for it.
And the law enforcement officers in Virginia actually conducted the search, is that correct?
That's correct. The Virginia State Police.
And what vehicle was it that you found when you got to Virginia?
It was a maroon Infiniti.
And you know the owner of that Infiniti?
Rhonda Colley.
All of the evidence that you discussed, the car, clothes, things like that, DNA, was that transported back with you and the other members of the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office?
Yes. Initially, that evening, we had driven through the night, so we were obviously exhausted, so we stayed that evening. While we were there, it was submitted into Wise County Sheriff's Office evidence room, so it was secure, and then the next morning, we picked it up and drove it back here straight away.
And part of some of that evidence was property that was received off of Mr. Colley's person when he was arrested, is that correct?
That's correct.
Your Honor, may I approach, please?
You bet.
All right. Detective, I'm going to show you what's been marked for identification as states SS. If you would just take a look at this exhibit and let me know if you recognize it.
I do.
And understanding, you weren't the person that collected this, but as part of your case, you were present and you've since reviewed this evidence, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And what is some of the evidence that you identified on here?
Sure. So there's 3 receipts. The first one is a receipt for the Eastwood Discount Market in Hilliard, Florida. And the next one is a receipt for the Speedway on 150 Hampton Point Drive for a Corona and some Marlboros. And the third is a receipt for the same Speedway at 150 Hampton Point, which happens to be in the front of the neighborhood to Southampton. And it is for cigarettes and a Gatorade. And then the last piece is some broken glass.
And are there times indicated on the 2 Speedway receipts?
Yes. So one of the first time for the Corona and the cigarettes is 10:14, 18 hours. And the second one is 10 o'clock at 18 seconds.
And August 27th.
Correct.
This Speedway, after you learned this information, did you look into the location, I believe you mentioned it, but the location of that Speedway?
Yes, it's at the very beginning of the Southampton neighborhood.
Okay.
On County Road 210.
Prior to court, do you recall making a presentation of maps for court here today?
I do.
Your Honor, may I approach?
You bet.
Detective Corporal, I'm sorry, Corporal English. I'm going to show you what's been marked as states BBB1 and 2. Can you take a look at those exhibits and let me know if you recognize them?
Yes, this is a disc of the PowerPoint that I initialed and signed.
And that's a printed out.
And this is printed out maps, correct.
And after reviewing those maps, they're accurate maps of the locations we're going to be discussing to the best of your knowledge, correct?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, state would move in states BBB1 and 2 and permission to publish those.
Hey, Judge.
Okay.
Received as state's next number deposit exhibit is at 38.
Yes.
State's 38.
Detective, if you could take a minute and you can step down and use the pointer. Just show us what we're looking at here.
So this is 1189 Garrison Drive, which would be Rhonda's house where James was living. This is County Road 210, although it says Old Palm Valley Road, it's really 210. And then this is the store right here.
Okay. So that's the Speedway that the receipts came from at both 10 a.m. and then another one at 10:14 a.m.
Correct.
Here's a close-up.
Correct.
I believe, describe that, what we're seeing here.
So this is County Road 210, and this is the store. This is the gas pumps. There's an awning over the gas pumps. That's not another building, that is the gas pumps. and then this is the actual store. This is the main entrance to the neighborhood, and this is Garrison Drive.
Okay. Are you familiar with that area?
I am.
Can you get from the gas station into Southampton without going back to 210?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
So if you were to take Garrison Drive to Southampton Club Way and make a right here on Hampton Point, there's a little driveway right here that leads right into the store.
Okay. Corporal English, during your investigation, were you able to identify the owner of the 9mm handgun that we've seen in evidence in this case?
I was Amanda's father, James Cloninger.
And what about the .45 caliber?
James Colley.
Detective English, throughout your investigation, did you obtain with legal process phone records of James Colley in this case?
I did.
Okay. And when we say phone records, we obviously heard some phone testimony earlier.
Sure.
How is what we're talking about different than what we heard earlier?
Sure, so the information that you heard earlier was about the actual device. I drafted a court order for phone records from AT&T, who is his provider, and requested certain information, call detail records, location data, stuff like that,
And what was the purpose in obtaining that information?
to get his locations.
Okay. Is that something that you would do yourself, or do you have another resource for that?
Sure, no, that is not something I would do myself. So after we receive the records back, we then send them to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, and they have analysts who are experts in mapping locations from the phone records.
Your Honor, at this time, I think I believe without objection from the defense, state would offer states JJ. It is AT&T records, a subset of those with attached business certification.
Is that correct, Mr. Jeanette?
Yes, sir.
No objection?
Yes, sir.
Without objection, it received at Stacy's at 39.
And Corporal English, when you obtained those records, were they voluminous?
They were, I think it was almost 900 pages.
Okay. And for court purposes today, you can review again states 39, but the time period and what are we entering here in evidence today?
So this is obviously not 900 pages. This is page 124 to page 143, and it is just the dates of August 25th till August 28th. So just a small portion.
And obviously, this is what you submitted and asked FDLE to map, focusing on the locations of him the night before and going into the day of the homicide?
Correct.
I wanted to ask you a few questions related to some people that have been identified, and we've heard their names throughout some of the testimony.
Sure.
Through your investigation in the case, who was identified in Amanda's phone as a contact Lacey Dobbs?
Lamar Dummerly,
And we heard earlier about a contact Nick Monet. Who was that?
a coworker, I believe, her boss, Amanda's boss.
And at the same time, we were talking about some contacts early morning before the homicide. There was a Tommy Roberson. Who is that to her?
That's going to be her stepfather.
Thank you. Detective English, in your investigation, were you able to locate surveillance video on the South Bellagio street in this case?
I was. I located it at 229 South Bellagio.
And I'm going to switch here to this map.
So this is.
If you'll describe what we're seeing here.
Correction. So this is Amanda's home. This is Mike Dickens' home, and this is 225 where I collected the video from.
And when you tell us about that, going to that house, what cameras you saw and what did you collect?
Sure. So there was 2 cameras on the home. I don't want to break the screen.
It's okay.
There was one on this eave and one on this eave, and the one on the left eave pointed out towards the entrance to the neighborhood, and the one on the right eave pointed directly down to the cul-de-sac.
Okay. And when you went to that house, viewed the surveillance, what is something you do to check to see if that system is keeping a correct date and time?
Sure, so I compare the video time because oftentimes people don't sync their video with the correct time. So I check that against UTC time.
So exactly what did you do?
Correct, so I took my cell phone, which automatically calculates the time, and I took another cell phone and took a picture of my cell phone in front of the timestamp on the camera and submitted that into evidence.
Okay. And was the time and date on the video system operating at 225 South Bellagio correct when you checked it?
It was.
Okay. Do you remember the day in which you collected this evidence?
I believe, may I reflect my notes, but I believe it was on the 29th. May I check?
You can check.
Thank you. I stand corrected, it was August 30th.
August 30th. And prior to court, did we prepare certain clips that were relevant to the investigation?
We did.
Okay. You collected, obviously, a larger time period, is that correct?
I did. I collected that whole night and part of the evening before.
Okay. And may I approach, Judge?
You may.
I don't believe there's any objection to getting this.
No, Your Honor.
Okay. And without objection, the thumb drive, what did we place on this thumb drive prior to court
The clips,
that we're going to be discussing here today?
yes. Just want to make sure it has my initials.
Yeah.
It does. Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, state would move in, states II and permission to publish.
That's going to be received in evidence of State's Exhibit 4, need to be published.
And before we start showing the clips, just so they have a orientation
Sure.
using this map before we start, what's going to be the vantage point, so to speak?
So the vantage point that you're going to see is going to be from the right eave, looking down to the cul-de-sac.
And Corporal English, I'm going to start with you on the early morning hours of the 26th, the 4:40 time in the morning, okay? And I'm going to start with clip 1 and ask you, let me get it started here.
So as you can see, it's 4:41, and there's a truck that looks to be a dark colored Ford pulling down Bellagio towards the cul-de-sac and eventually pulls into Mike Bacon's driveway. Lights go off, and then you'll, I don't know if this clip ends before it happens.
It's a short clip. Then we pick up with clip 2.
So
What's, for the record, Corporal English was the start time of clip 2, approximately.
it is 4:42:18.
Okay.
So the lights come on, which typically indicates the door has been opened. And this is, if it's hard to see, somebody walked right there. You can see them walking in front of the truck towards the home.
You can see this clip is approximately 4 minutes long. We'll sit here and watch it. Corporal.
Yeah, so the lights go out on the truck. I think they just time out. May I move back so I can see?
Yeah.
Somebody's walking to the side of the truck and opens the door. There's another person that's now exiting and walking towards the truck. They're on the passenger side of the truck at this point.
While we're kind of watching it here, you said the truck is located at Mike Dickens' house.
Correct.
You see that house kind of right at the end of the screen with the lit up driveway?
Yes.
Where is 260 Bellagio in relation to that house?
Right behind these trees, bushes, underneath this light. You can't really see it well.
Just around the bend?
Directly next door.
Okay. of the cul-de-sac.
Yes. Lights go off.
And Corporal, if you see something that you want to note, if you just notate the time.
Okay.
While we're watching this, approximately what time, if you have to look at your notes, does the truck end up leaving the driveway?
It's approximately 4 or 5 minutes later after it arrives. 4:41 it arrives, and 4:46:17. Lights come on, 4:45:06. Lights go back out, 4:45:19. Lights come on, 4:45:47. Somebody's walking back towards the home, 4:45:53. And the truck starts to reverse at 4:46:16.
For the record, publishing clip 3 identified on the exhibit.
4:46:35, the truck passes 220 Appalachia.
In your reviewing of the surveillance video, were you able to then look to the next morning? And what were you looking for the next morning leading up to the homicide?
Correct, so I was trying to timeline people when they arrived at the scene, at the residence, and just sort of get a general timeline that we knew was factual based on this.
And for the record, I'm going to publish clip 4, and I'll ask you.
Sure, so that is 9, 10, 50 hours, and that is Amanda arriving at the residence in her white SUV.
Just so the jurors can see it, let me back it up. And so, at the beginning, you see this white SUV, and that is Amanda's car.
Which is the same one that was in the residence, that's correct.
For the record, labeled clip 5 on the exhibit.
So that is 9:42:45 hours, and that is Lamar arriving in the neighborhood and subsequently at the house. In the same white truck that was located in the driveway. He makes a wide turn there. Almost you think he's going to turn into a driveway to the right, but I think because he was in a dually, he felt the need to make a wide turn.
And clip 6 for the record.
That is PSA, arriving at 9:55, 51 hours.
You recognize that vehicle as one of your agency's vehicles?
I do.
Clip 7, I'll ask you about this when it comes up. And Your Honor, with stipulation and agreement with the defense, this is a longer clip. I'm going to fast forward to the relevant portion. Well, let me ask you, when you looked into the video system there at the house, what triggers the system to work?
Motion.
Okay. And so here you see across the street, again.
Mowing his yard.
Yeah, in the yard.
Well, he wasn't blowing it right there. He wasn't blowing it. So at 10:09, 24 hours, the PSA starts to leave.
The record, I'm publishing clip 8.
Yes, so at 10:11, 54 hours, that is Lindy arriving in her dark colored SUV, same one that was in the driveway.
For the record, I'm publishing clip 9.
10:27, 24 hours, that is Rachel arriving in the same van that we located in the driveway.
And the last clip we're going to show here in a second, clip 10. What do we see on clip 10? Which is the last relevant clip after everyone arrives. Pop that up for you.
That would be Rachel and Lamar fleeing the residence.
And the start of the clip is 10:34, is that correct?
Correct.
With your permission, may I pass forward? Okay.
That's Lamar running from the residence, across the cul-de-sac and through some residents,
What time?
between two residents.
What was the approximate time?
10:30, can you remind it, I'm sorry.
No, you're
I
fine.
can reflect back to my notes if I'm allowed.
Shortly after 10.
10:36:11.
And I'd like to let it play until we see Rachel.
10:37:09, Rachel is seen running from the residence over towards Mike Diggins' residence.
Yeah, any further questions?
Cross-examination, Mr. Shea.
Yes, Sharon, may I have a second look at the receipts? Detective English, on the receipt where, on 8/27 at 10:14, where Mr. Colley bought Corona, it doesn't have anything on there about gas, but he did buy gas at that point, did he not?
He did buy gas. I don't know if it was at 10:14 or 10 o'clock. I'd have to reflect my notes. Do you mind?
That would be great, thank you.
$10:13, he purchases beer and gas.
10:13.
Correct, which would essentially be your 10:14 receipt.
10:14 receipt?
Correct.
I didn't see that on there. And he-
It's not on there.
And he only purchased, what was it, 2.76 gallons of gas, I think it was?
I don't recall.
Do you have that in your notes?
I do, might. Do you mind if I take a
Please do.
minute?
Please do.
$2.765 gallons of gas.
0.765?
Correct.
That's not very much gas, is it?
It's subjective. I guess it depends on what you're putting it in.
Or how far you're going?
True.
Also, as far as the phone calls, you were in here for Detective Causey's, and I'm sure you have it. Amanda had called JR at 8:58 that morning, I believe it was, correct?
May I reflect my timeline?
Yes.
8:58, Amanda called James, and this call lasted for approximately 6 minutes.
And I believe Amanda was coming from the RV park on 16 and 95?
Presumably, yes.
Based on Lamar's testimony?
Correct.
So she would have been in the car during that time, roughly?
Correct.
Okay. And then JR called Amanda at 9:41, and they talked for approximately 14 minutes?
Correct.
Right, so they would have been on the phone when Lamar arrived at 9:42.
Let me look back at the video.
And
my
according,
video
yeah,
timeline.
I think the video showed 9:42:45.
9:42, correct.
Okay. And then the PSA officer arrived, and I think it was 9:55:51.
PSA arrived at 9:55:50.
50, okay. So the roughly 14 minutes, she would have still been on the phone close to when the PSA officer arrived?
I believe close to it, yes, sir.
Hung up right around that same time?
Correct.
Okay. Nothing else, Sharon?
And redirect examination.
Briefly, Corporal, back on the videos, during that time frame when you were timelining out everyone's arrival, you did not locate a defendant traveling down South Bellagio.
Objection beyond the scope of cross.
I'll sustain that objection.
No further questions.
Any regard?
No, Your Honor.
Take a seat.
Thank you.
State your lawyer next witness. Okay, call your next witness.
State calls Mike Dickens.
Mr. Dickens, if you come on right up here to the witness stand. If you'll remain standing when you get there, raise your right hand, please.
Do you solemnly swear affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes. Take a seat, sir. Mr. Johnson, you may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, sir. Could you introduce yourself to the jury?
My name is Mike Dickens.
And how are you employed, sir?
I'm sorry?
How are you employed?
Full-time. By who?
What do you do, sir?
I'm in the construction industry.
And where do you live?
Live in 249 South Bellagio,
How long have you lived at that address?
2011.
And do you know, sir, an individual by the name of Amanda Colley?
Yes, I do.
And how do you know her?
Just mutual friends.
All right.
We moved in.
I'm sorry?
Mutual friends from when we moved in, built a house together.
Do you know an individual by the name of James Colley?
I do.
And he was Amanda's husband, is that correct?
Yes.
And did you meet both James and Amanda Colley roughly at the same time?
Same time, yes.
How would you describe your relationship with James Colley, the defendant in this case?
To me, I'd say probably pretty much close best friends.
Now, you said that you and his family sort of describe to me how you met them again.
I just, one of the first couple of houses in the cul-de-sac, and just, just neighbors. Then grew a rapport with them. Kids grew up together. Kids were the same age, our kids and their kids.
Who moved into the neighborhood on Bellagio Drive first?
They did.
They did, okay.
But between us two?
Yes, sir.
Yes, they did first.
All right. And do you know how long approximately they lived there
It
before
could
you
have
moved?
been a couple months, sir.
And initially, did James and Amanda Colley live at 260 South Bellagio together?
Yes, sir.
May I approach witness?
You may.
Mr. Dickens, I am showing you what's been marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit MM1, which is a CD, as well as MM2, which is a printout of the items that are on the CD. Do you recognize those, sir?
I do.
And how do you recognize it?
I believe it was a couple weeks ago. I
Okay.
went into your office.
And you reviewed some photographs that are on the CD?
Yeah, the photographs that you showed me that day, yes, sir.
Okay. And after you reviewed it, you signed it and dated, is that
After
correct?
you made a copy, yes, sir.
And is that located on this disc here?
My
Your
signature? Yes, at the bottom. That's probably it.
And after you had a chance to review those photographs, were those photographs a fair and accurate depiction of a map of the neighborhood as well as some other photographs as well?
That's correct.
Your Honor, this time I'd offer State's Exhibit MM1 and MM2 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection.
No objection, no. We received the state's composite exhibit 41.
And publish the exhibit, Your Honor.
You may.
Mr. Dickens, I want to take you to photograph A that was on that disc. This is a map of the neighborhood, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And does this accurately depict the residence where Amanda Colley and James Colley initially lived in reference to yours?
That's correct.
In terms of your relationship with the defendant in this case, how often did you talk with him?
Quite often.
Every day?
Pretty much, I would think so, yes, sir.
Did you hang out together, do
We
things
did.
together?
We did.
How often would you hang out with them?
Probably several times a week, I would think, yes, sir.
Okay, what kind of things would you do together?
Play poker, go to poker room, go to bars, play pool.
Did you,
Races,
did you talk to him on the phone?
yes. Not often though, but I did.
All right. What was your cell phone number back then?
904-349-3635.
And how long did you have that cell phone number?
Since long as I can remember being in Florida.
Do you have that same phone number
I
today?
did, yes.
And did you talk to James Colley on that phone?
I have, yes.
Do you recall what his cell phone number was back then? Do you still have it on your phone today?
I should, yes, sir.
Okay, can you take your phone out and
Yes, sir.
look at it and tell us?
is what I have put under name.
Okay. Now, when you and I talked a few weeks ago, you advised that his phone number was 904-315-1096. Is that correct?
I don't recall, sir. Can you give me that number again, sir?
904-315-1096.
Okay, I do have that number. Yes, sir. Under James C.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And that was a number you would talk to him on occasion, is that correct?
I would think so, yes, sir. I can recall that.
On average, how often would you talk to James Colley on the phone? Either voice or by text?
I mean, we probably not often. I mean, we live right beside each other, so it was more when we saw each other, but it was occasionally.
Okay, would you text him once a week, twice a week, 10 times a week?
I would say less than 10 times for sure. I can't give you a for sure number, sir.
Did there come a time, Mr. Dickens, when, and I won't go through all the details of it, but would there become a time when you became aware there were some marital problems between James and Amanda Colley?
Yes, sir.
And at some point, you become aware that James Colley had moved out of the residence there at 260 South Bellagio.
That is correct.
Do you recall when you became aware of that?
I don't. No, sir.
Was it shortly before the events that we're here to talk about today?
I would think so. It was, from what I recall, would be after July 4th.
Okay. Did you have any contact with, before I ask you the question, do you see the person in the courtroom today, James Colley, that we're referring to?
Yes, sir.
Can you point to him and describe the article of clothing he's wearing?
Red tie, blue suit.
Okay, sitting over here at this table?
Yes, sir.
And the record reflected the witness has identified the defendant?
Noted for the record.
Did you have any contact with the defendant on August the 27th of 2015?
Is that the date of the incident?
Yes, sir, in the early morning hours.
Yes, sir.
Now, at that particular point in time, you indicated you were aware that he was not living in the residence there on South Bellagio. Did you know where he was living at the time?
With the sister, yes, sir.
And what is his sister's name?
Rhonda.
Do you know where that house is located?
It was in Southampton.
Were you aware that he had an injunction that prevented him from being within 500 feet of the residence on South Bellagio?
I was.
Now, approximately what time was it that you had contact with the defendant on August the 27th of 2015?
Probably shortly around 4 a.m.
How did you have first contact with him? Was it by phone? Was it by?
He was calling, I can't recall totally, but he was either calling me or I know I finally answered the door. He was knocking on the door in the garage.
What were you doing at the time?
Sleeping.
Did you get up and answer the door?
I did.
What did he say to you when you did so?
He just wanted me to come outside and look in the front seat of his truck.
Did he tell you why he wanted you to look in the front seat of his truck?
Not at the beginning, he just kept telling me to get out there and look what I did or look what I found.
Okay. How would you describe his demeanor at the time?
He was agitated. He was upset. Yeah, he was real antsy, but he was upset. He was crying, from what I recall.
He was upset, you said?
Yes, sir.
Did you ever go and go outside of the driveway where he was?
I finally did, yes, sir.
Did most of your conversation occur in the driveway there at your
Most
house?
of the conversation occurred right outside the front door.
And did you go and see what it is he wanted you to see?
I did. I think I walked partly to the truck, but I did not, from what I recall, I didn't go and look in the truck itself. That I can remember.
What vehicle was he there in?
He was in his green Ford F-150.
Okay. And did he show you what it was that he wanted you to see?
Yes, sir.
And what was it that he wanted you to see?
A bunch of sex toys.
And he was upset about
He was.
discovering these items, is that correct?
It was, yes, sir.
Did he tell you where he found these toys?
He did.
Where did he tell you he found them?
He told me he had ransacked the house and he found this inside the house.
And when you say ransacked the house, or was he referring to Amanda Colley's residence at 360 South Bellagio?
He was, yes, referring to his house, yes.
How did you respond to that?
Basically that, well, there's your proof, you know, that she's cheating, and my conversation basically was, big deal, you know, big deal. Who cares? Go home, you know.
So up to this point, you were generally aware of the problems that they've been in the back and forth and things of that nature. Is that right?
To some extent.
Right. And I didn't know all the details,
No,
but you knew that there were some problems that have been going on for a while. And he shows you these toys, and your response to him was big deal.
From what I recall, yes, sir.
But his response to you, his demeanor was that this was a big deal to him, correct?
No, I don't think I ever stated that.
I didn't say that, I'm just asking you. Did it appear it was a big deal to him?
He did. I just kept going on. This is what I found. This is what I found. I'm like, and I just, from what I recall, I just kept telling him, big F deal, you know.
What did you tell me? How did your conversation proceed from that point?
I told him that we were, you know, I said, you need to chill out. You need to go home. Let's get through this divorce. Told him go get a beer out of my garage, or I think out of the garage, or I gave him a beer, told him to go home, go to sleep.
I want to take you to photograph B here. Are these the items that he showed you that night?
From what I recall, yes, sir.
Did he also show you some other items other than these toys?
The only thing I barely recall would be some clothing. I think it was some boxers or something.
Okay. Did he seem to be more upset about one type of item than another?
I wouldn't think so.
Do you recall giving a deposition in this case, Mr. Dickens?
Yes.
Okay. on February the 1st of 2016, is that correct? Does that sound correct?
I mean, I recall going to clerk of court or the clerk of court's office, I don't know what day it was.
And this was a deposition that was, Mr. Shoemaker here, he was at that deposition, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And Ms. Dunn, he or she was at that deposition, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And at the beginning of that deposition, you took an oath to tell the truth, just like you did today, is that correct?
I did.
And if there's any, may I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You bet.
And for counsel, I'm going to refer to page 21, lines 18 and 19. And I want to be fair to you, Mr. Dickens. I'm going to show you the deposition and just see if that refreshes your recollection. Page 21 here,
Yes, sir.
page 18 and 19, if you could read that sentence there.
Which one?
This one right
Second
here.
one?
Don't read it out loud, just take a look at it.
Oh, okay. Okay, I don't recall that statement.
You don't recall making the statement that you saw the straps and the dildo,
Oh,
whatever?
you pointed to this one right here, sir.
Okay, just take a look at that whole paragraph.
Yes, I recall the first part of it, and I recall the second part of that,
Okay.
second sentence.
You don't recall saying that, I think that these items, the straps and dildo, made him more upset than the clothes did?
Oh, I'm reading it wrong. Yes, sir.
You do remember?
Yes,
that?
sir, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I read it wrong. I
That's quite all right.
apologize.
That's quite all right. That's
I was
all
reading
right.
it backwards.
So now that you've had your recollection refreshed, these toys here did make him more upset than the clothes did. Is that correct?
Apparently, I remember making reference to clothes and what I saw in the toys. I mean, as I said, he was upset about the toys.
That's what you said at your deposition, correct?
Yeah, to what the paper says, I don't recall word for word, no, sir.
Okay. And that was closer in time to when these events occurred than today, is that right?
Oh, definitely.
Did the defendant tell you, other than finding these items, finding the clothes, did he tell you what else he did while he was in Amanda Colley's home?
Yes.
What else did he tell you that he did?
He just told me he ransacked the house and he busted TVs.
What was your response to that?
From what I call, I told him he was stupid.
Why was that?
Because get himself in trouble. He wasn't supposed to be around the house.
Did at any point in time during this conversation you ever invite him inside your home?
I did not.
Did he ever say that he wanted to come inside?
No, sir.
Now, at this particular point in time, did it look like he had been drinking or anything like that?
Not that I recall. I
Did,
didn't recall. I mean, I usually knew when he was drinking.
All right. Did, you had indicated earlier something about some beer.
I told you that I told him either I told him to get one beer or I give him a beer or give him 2 beer, whatever. I said, take these and go home and go to sleep.
Okay.
That was the last conversation.
So he grabbed a couple of beers from
1 or 2, I don't recall, but and left.
So how long was the defendant at your house?
Less than 30 minutes.
And did he eventually leave?
He did.
Did you talk with him again after that?
I didn't, not verbally, no, sir.
Did you communicate with him? Maybe not verbally, but did you communicate with him in any other way after that?
I texted him.
Right. Why was that?
Probably, I don't know, it was an hour or so after maybe. Told him, as I woke back up, told him it was stupid and now he's gonna ruin his life. Stuff like that, you know. He was going through a divorce and, you know.
Did you text him about the fact that he had ransacked the house and left sort of evidence behind that he had been there? Did you text him about that?
I think I told him, if I recall, that he needs to clean his mess up, but now he's gonna go to jail, you know. So at some point like that.
did you have to work that day?
Yes, sir.
And you recall what time you left for work that morning?
Yeah, somewhere between 7 and 7:30, I think.
When you left your house, your house is within eyesight of Amanda Colley's residence, correct?
Yes, sir.
When you left that morning, did you see any vehicles in the driveway?
I did not.
Did you send any other than the text that you sent to him telling him he needed to clean up his mess, did you send him any other text that morning? And this would probably have been before you went to work. Do you recall anything like that?
No, I don't, sir.
After you went to work, did you learn of the shooting that occurred at Amanda Colley's home?
I did, yes, sir.
And where were you at the time?
In my office.
And how did you find out about it?
I don't know, I can't remember if it was my son or my father-in-law called, or my wife, I can't remember. Someone called me, one of my family members called me.
Okay, your father-in-law, where was he at the time?
He should have been at my house.
What was he doing there?
He takes care of my youngest daughter, takes her to school, camp, whatever.
When you received the information that there had been a shooting at Amanda Colley's home, what did you do?
Jumped in the truck and headed to the house.
When you arrived at the house, you learned in more detail what had occurred there.
I don't recall, I was in a blackout mode after I got that call, so I was just hightailing all the way through there and down the street.
Did at some point you learned that the defendant was responsible for what occurred at Amanda Colley's home?
I'm sure, yes, sir.
After that, did you text the defendant any text messages?
I did. I don't remember what time it was that morning. I think it was later that morning. But I was trying to figure out where he was when when I was trying to go to the house.
Did you text him to tell him he needed to turn himself in?
Yes, I think that's what I did tell him.
Among some other things?
Plenty of things, yes, sir.
Now, I want to talk to you a little bit. I want to kind of go backwards a little bit in time. With regard to the marital problems that Amanda Colley and James Colley were having at the time, prior to all the shooting and all this that occurred, did the defendant in this particular case tell you that he suspected Amanda Colley of having a relationship with another individual?
He did.
Did you ever, after the defendant had left the residence, after he had moved in with his sister Rhonda, did you ever see a man at Amanda Colley's residence?
One time.
And do you recall when that was?
I do not.
What was the guy doing when you saw him?
It was cutting grass.
And what did you do when you saw him? When you say cutting grass, what part of the property was he cutting grass?
Front yard.
What did you do when you saw him cutting grass in the front yard?
I took a picture.
I'll show you photo C here. Is this the photograph that you took of the man?
Yes, sir.
What did you do with that photograph after you took it?
I sent it to his sister Rhonda for verification that who that guy was.
Now, during this period of time, I'm talking about in the sort of weeks and days leading up to the shooting, did the defendant ever ask you to look and see if there were Amanda's vehicle or anyone else's vehicles were parked in the parking in the driveway or near her house?
I think I vaguely remember a couple texts if there was anybody in the driveway, any cars.
Do you remember on July the 13th, him sending you a text asking you if Amanda stayed at the house last night?
Vaguely, yes, sir.
Do you remember on July the 25th at 10:23 p.m., him texting you asking if Amanda's truck was Amanda's truck here this a.m., meaning this morning?
Vaguely, sir.
Do you remember him texting you at 8:24 p.m. on July the 26th and asking, was there a car there?
Vaguely, I don't recall those conversations or those texts.
Do you recall on July the 25th, 2015 at 7 a.m. him texting you asking, is her car there?
I don't remember those texts.
During your contact with the defendant, your close friend, your best friend, did the defendant ever blame anyone in particular for causing, or I guess helping to cause, his marital problems with his wife Amanda?
I don't ever recall him naming anybody, no, sir.
Do you recall him texting you on July the 4th of 2015 at 8:22 and telling you that Lindy came by today? 30 minutes later, Amanda tells me she doesn't feel anything for me anymore.
I don't, no, sir.
Do you recall the defendant texting you on July the 16th of 2015 at 4:13 p.m. and saying, I'm pretty sure she is going to take Lindy with her to court to talk bad about me?
I don't recall a conversation about that.
Do you recall him texting you on July the 19th of 2015 at 12:17 a.m., a little bit after midnight, and saying it's total bullshit. She has those two bitches in her ear. They have never been through that shit.
That was my conversation?
No, that was, do you recall receiving a text from the
I
defendant?
do not, sir.
Do you know who he was referring to? Those two bitches.
No, Lindy's the only one I ever knew. Didn't know him personally, but the only person I knew who talked, that he was referencing.
Did you know an individual by the name of Rachel Hendricks?
Not until that day.
Did you, do you remember receiving a text from the defendant on July the 19th of 2015, the same day, just a little bit after that previous text, 12:19 a.m., saying, quote, Lindy feeds her full of shit?
I don't know, sir.
Do you remember going back to your deposition? Counsel, I refer you to page 39, lines 24 through 40, line 1.
Or the lines.
Page 39, line 24 through page 40, line 1. Do you remember in your deposition testifying that I always knew he was upset with Lindy? He didn't want her around because every time Lindy came around, Amanda would just be a different person.
I do remember those conversations.
On page 40, starting at line 20 to 24, do you remember ever testifying in that same deposition? I think he was just worried about Lindy ruining his marriage, and he thought she was breaking up their marriage by telling her she didn't have to deal with that kind of stuff.
They really did remember that conversation.
Do you recall in either conversation or text messages the defendant calling Amanda Colley names?
I do not personally, not recall.
Do you remember getting a text from him on July the 26th of 2000?
Objection, Your Honor, improper impeachment.
Do you recall the defendant sending you a text on July the 26th of 2015 at 8:53 p.m. saying she's a whore?
Maybe, truthfully, I don't recall.
Do you recall receiving a text from the defendant on August the 5th of 2015 at 11:40 p.m. stating she is an evil person?
I can't say I do, sir.
Do you recall receiving two texts on August the 5th, 2015 at 11:42 and 11:43 p.m.? First text, she's a cheating hire, and at 11:43 it was corrected whore, she's a cheating whore. Do you remember receiving those texts?
I don't recall much of those texts. That didn't really mean too much, no, sir.
Do you remember receiving a text from the defendant on August the 5th, 2015 at 11:50 p.m. stating she is the worst person on this earth, exclamation point?
I remember any of those conversations.
Do you remember the defendant ever, either in verbal conversation or in text messages, indicating what he might do to Amanda?
Never.
Do you remember him sending you a text on July the 19th of 2015 at 12:22 a.m. stating, "So I'm going to have to get nasty"?
Do not remember that, no, sir.
Do you remember receiving a text from the defendant on August the 5th of 2015 at 11:56 p.m. stating, quote, "Now she will pay"?
No, sir.
May I have a moment, Your Honor? Nothing further, Your Honor.
Cross-examination, Mr. Shoemaker.
Yes, sir, 1 second. Good afternoon, Mr. Dickens.
Sir?
As far as the early morning hours, I guess around 4 o'clock on the 26th, when James showed up at your house, would you say he was more hurt than angry?
Pretty much, he was, seemed pretty upset, but he was crying,
Because he just found those items
Sure.
from his wife's
Yes,
house?
sir.
Okay. Also, you had stated that, I believe you stated that he was intoxicated, he wasn't drunk at that time?
I didn't catch that.
He was not drunk or impaired at that time that you could tell?
Not that I pretty much know, but from my visual, I didn't smell no alcohol on him. He wasn't acting belligerent or anything like that.
And then you stated that you thought JR had moved out shortly after the July 4th, around that time frame?
I think it was after July, before or after July 4th. It was right around that holiday, I think so.
Okay. And then you also stated that you knew that there was an injunction in place against James, right?
I did, yes, sir.
After, do you know about what time that was?
I do not. I don't know, sir.
All right, well,
It was all around that holiday.
From the time that James moved out until August 26th, did you see James and Amanda and their children together?
Several times, yes.
Several times?
Yes.
And was that at the marital residence?
It was, yes, sir.
And when they were together, how would you describe their interaction?
Judge, I'm going to object as to relevance.
Can you repeat that, please?
As to how would you explain their interaction while they were together if you watched them?
There was no problems.
Did they appear to be happy?
Yes, sir.
Did they appear to be a loving family?
Pretty much, yes, sir.
Did you, during that time frame when you were together, did your family and the Colley family ever get together?
I don't recall that.
Okay.
No, sir.
All right. And also, did you at some point become aware of the impending divorce?
Yes, sir.
All right. And a lot of those text messages that Mr. Johnson was asking you about, if you remember, would the time frame that he was telling you, would that have been after the divorce was filed?
I can't answer that question. I don't recall that.
But you do remember them going through a divorce?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Yes. this incident that happened on the early morning hours of August 27th, do you recall how many days before that you had seen the Colleys together as a family?
I don't know the exact date, but it was within I don't recall the exact date, but it was around Trey's birthday.
And so if Trey was born, his birthday was August 26th, would it have been close to that time?
Seems that sounds like the day before.
And if you said you saw them together, were they together as a family unit then?
All four of them were together, yes.
Okay. Do you know if there was ever an issue with the air conditioning unit at the Colley residence?
There was. I just don't recall the date. It was after he had moved out.
And as far as the yard,
Check as to relevance to this line of question, Judge.
Go ahead and ask your next question.
the other question has to do with the cutting of the grass. Did you used to cut the grass for the Colleys after JR moved out?
I did. I took care of that property and several others in the cul-de-sac.
So when you sent that picture of what we now know to be Lamar cutting the grass, was it to stir the pot or was it to find out whether or not you needed to continue cutting the grass?
It definitely was not to steer anything. It was to find out I was just about to go cut the grass. Didn't know if it was a landscape coming, didn't know if my text, I think I recall, was I asked Rhonda if it was Lindy's husband. I've never met that gentleman. I don't know what it looks like. That's what the purpose of that text was.
And then also, kind of to backtrack a little, when you would see the Colley family together, and after he moved out and after the injunction, what were some of the activities that they were doing?
Hanging out in the backyard, playing. The birthday one, I think he had took a gift to him, and they were out back playing with that gift, and I was at the park. That's when I saw him with my two kids.
I have nothing else to say.
Any redirect, Mr. Johnson?
Yes, Your Honor.
Seconds, I want to go back to this line of question. I think Mr. Rasheed asked you about this too, and follow up to my question regarding the defendant's demeanor the early morning hours of August the 27th of 2015. I think the descriptions that you used here today was upset and crying. I think that you were asked about whether he appeared to be angry. So I'll ask you that question again. Did the defendant appear to be angry when he was talking to you on the early morning hours?
As I remember stating, I think I said at one point he was irate, but then he was crying, he was upset. I mean, it was all running together.
Okay.
So I can't say he was, whatever you just say, he was mad the whole time.
Okay. Do you remember giving an interview with Detective English on August the 20th, the same day that all this happened, 27th of 2015?
Yes, sir, in my house.
And when she was asking you about his demeanor, you referred to him in that interview as angry, correct?
I don't recall that.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor? I'll show you page 8. Line 23 and 24. Okay. She was asking you if he was angry, and you said yes. Is that correct?
That's what it said, yes, sir.
And that's what you said that day, correct?
That's what it must have been, yes, sir, I don't recall.
Okay. No further.
Any recross? Is Mr. Dickens excused?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Dickens, you are excused.
Thanks, sir.
State, you have a short witness, like 10 minutes.
We have a couple of short witnesses, yes, sir.
Everybody up there, right? You're okay. I see a hand going up, I think you're right. I'm good. I'm good.
Keep going.
Okay, let's keep going. I call you everyone else.
State would call Robert Young.
Try not to completely worry about. Mr. Young, if you'll come right up here to the witness stand, please.
Yeah, I'll
Remain standing. Raise your right hand.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
You can be seated. You may proceed.
Thank you. Good afternoon, sir. It's good tonight. If you would introduce yourself to the jury and let them know how you're employed.
I'm a public service assistant. My name is Robert Young. I work for the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office.
How long have you been with St. John's as a PSA, public service assistant?
4.5 years.
And do you have prior law enforcement experience?
I do. I'm retired from the New York State Police and spent 15 years with the postal inspectors.
And what are your duties as a PSA? And if they differ from a deputy, explain that to the jurors.
We do not, well, my job at this time, we did initial investigations into non-suspect related crimes.
Okay. And kind of take initial information and decide whether it needed, you could handle it or pass it on to a deputy? Is
Correct.
that-
We would make the initial report.
And what type of crimes? Any kind of crimes in the
Non-suspect related, burglary, criminal mischief, identity theft.
Were you working in that capacity back on August 27th, 2015?
I was.
Did you have an occasion to respond to a burglary complaint that morning?
I did.
And do you know the address where you responded to?
260 Bellagio Drive.
And the information you had, who was the complainant at that time?
Originally it came in as Lamar Doubly, but in fact it was Amanda.
And do you know approximately when you responded out to that area?
I'm sorry.
What time you responded out to that area?
I arrived officially at 9:57.
9:57?
Excuse me?
Did you say 9:57?
A.M.
Okay. Can you check your...
9:56, I'm sorry. On the move.
Can you tell the jurors who was present when you responded?
When I arrived at the front door, there was a gentleman who opened the door and did not introduce himself. He just pointed to the living room and said, "She's over there." That the female was in fact Amanda Colley. The gentleman that opened the door was later identified to me as Lamar Doubly.
Okay. And can you tell the jurors what you observed about the house and just the demeanor of the female that you made contact with?
When I came into the living room, Mr. Doubly went off to the side to the kitchen, started doing dishes. I had no further contact with him. The house, there was a big TV, maybe a 50-inch TV, had been smashed. You could see where it had burned. There was glass shattered on the floor. There was some clothes disarrayed. A couple items were just like on the couch where there would have been somewhere else.
What was the demeanor of the female that you made, Amanda?
You could tell she had been crying. She was upset. She was holding. She had a small dog she was holding. She came out of the bedroom and said, "Look, this is done. He did this." And that's when, I asked what was going on.
Okay. You said she said he did this, so did you find out that it was an identified suspect, not a non-suspect type situation?
Yes, I asked her, I said, "Well, would you explain to me what's going on?" And she said, "Well, my husband did this."
hearsay, Your Honor.
It's the same.
Without telling us what she said, I'm going to ask you, after you spoke with Ms. Colley, okay, without telling us what she said, what did you do after you spoke with her?
After she explained the situation, to my aspect, it was no longer a burglary because it was a husband and wife. I said that we needed a deputy for the domestic, and at that point, I asked her if she wanted one, and she said she'd think about it. I went outside, called the zone sergeant that was in charge of the shift and explained the situation.
And did you ultimately decide to get someone out there right away or not make that decision?
When I went outside and called the sergeant, Amanda Colley came out.
Your Honor, objection hearsay.
Not offered for the truth.
Go ahead, you said you just came out. Go ahead, answer the question, then I'll rule on the objection.
Came out and said she did not want to take any action at this time. She wanted to talk to her attorney and her mom. And I asked her 2 or 3 times, are you sure? And she was adamant that she did not want any action. She was going to wait, speak to her mom and her attorney.
So after hearing that, you didn't take any further action
Correct.
at that time? After you shortly thereafter left the house?
Correct.
And did there come a time where you heard about a shooting in that same area after you left the home?
Correct. I left Bellagio Drive, went up to Route 16, maybe 2-3 miles away, when the call came over the radio that there was a shooting in the area.
One moment. And PSA Young, when you left the house that morning, were you aware that there was an injunction in place between
I
the two?
was not.
And did that have, the lack of that knowledge contribute to your belief there wasn't a burglary that morning that you said
Correct.
earlier?
Yes.
All right. Nothing further.
Cross-examination, Mr. Schmidt.
No, Your Honor.
Is Mr. Young excused?
He is.
You are excused. Thank you. You have a very short witness. Real witness. Let's just call it that.
How long do you want to go to your honor?
How long is your next witness?
I can do one in 13 minutes.
15 minutes?
10, 15
Everybody okay
minutes.
for 15 minutes? Okay. You see that thumbs up in the back?
Okay.
All right, let's go
Want to
for
keep going?
15 more minutes.
Yes, sir.
Wait, who's your next witness?
State would call Detective McGinnis.
Detective McGinnis, if you will take the witness stand right here. Have you remain standing when you get there. You will raise your right hand, please.
Do you solemnly swear affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Be seated. Ms. Dunn, you may inquire.
Thank you. Deputy, if you would, please introduce yourself to the jury, let them know how you're employed.
Yes, I'm Deputy Joseph McGinnis, Deputy Sheriff of the St. Johns County Sheriff's Office for about 19 years now.
Okay. And what are your current duties?
Currently, I'm assigned to the patrol unit in the northwest part of the county as a patrol deputy.
And have you held other positions throughout your career at St. John's?
Yes, I've worked as a patrol deputy, as a shift evidence technician, as a traffic unit, as a traffic homicide investigator and a reconstructionist, a member of the bomb squad, and a detective with the major crimes unit.
And what position were you in back in August of 2015?
I was a detective with the major crimes unit.
Were you asked at that time, on or about August 27th, 2015, to assist in the death investigation, a homicide of Amanda Colley and Lindy Dobbins?
Yes, I was.
And what did you do initially?
Initially, I responded to the Garrison Drive address, which was an address that came up during the investigation. It was not the scene. My assignment at the time was to respond there, secure that address as a place of interest, and to interview family members of the alleged suspect at the time.
Okay. And after you did that at that location, what were you asked to do next?
I remained on the scene to keep the scene secure, and then during the course of the investigation, it was learned that Mr. Colley had gone to a nearby gas station,
made some purchases, so I went to that gas station located on County Road 210 and obtained the surveillance video from the gas station.
And when you responded to that, you remember what gas station it was at the time?
It was the Speedway, and it was located right at the entrance to the neighborhood.
And when you went to that location, are you familiar with video surveillance systems?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And how is it that you obtained that video?
I spoke to the clerk that was working. She contacted her manager. I spoke to the manager on the phone, explained who I was and what was going on. They gave me permission to access their video system, gave me the password to access their video system, at which point in time I sat down at their computer station. I verified the timestamp on the computer station to make sure that the timestamp correlated with the actual time, and then started to view the video.
And the transaction you were looking for at that time centered on what time information did you have?
Approximately 10, 11 a.m.
And were you able to locate a transaction around that time?
Yes, through the video system. That particular store had quite a few cameras, and so through the video system I was able to observe a vehicle pull in, the defendant get out of the vehicle, enter the store, make a purchase, leave the store, get back in the vehicle and leave.
Okay. And when you reviewed that video, did you actually download that video yourself?
I did.
Okay. And after downloading that video and having it, did you indicate there's several camera locations at that store, is that correct?
That's correct.
What did you do with that, all the various cameras in order to make a video that kind of flowed a little more seamlessly?
Once I collected all the video from the camera system, I extracted individual video clips from the individual cameras and was able to cut and splice them together into compilation that allows the viewer to watch Mr. Colley's movements throughout his transaction without having to go through the actual system and pull up each individual camera angle.
And prior to court, did you have an opportunity to view that video and your compilation video as we prepared it on a disc for court?
Yes, I did.
Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
Show you what has been marked previously as states 00 for identification. If you could take a look at that and let me know if you recognize it.
Yes, I did.
Okay. And what did you recognize that to be?
That is the disc that was prepared and my signature and date on it.
And when we prepared this for court, those were videos from the Speedway store and your compilation video that you prepared yourself.
Yes, the raw data plus the compilation.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time, state would move in states 00.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Without objection, we receive the State's Exhibit 42. 42, correct?
Yes. And for the record, the state's going to publish the compilation video.
Okay, go ahead.
while we're watching it. This is your compilation video, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. We don't see times on this video. Were the times visible on the individual data clips that you have?
Yes, the individual raw data has the timestamps on them.
Can you recall another feature on the individual raw data that kind of pops up as a transaction statement?
Yes, this camera view, the way their system is set up, that register is tied into the camera system, so as the clerk is ringing up a transaction, it displays what is being purchased.
That also is kind of stripped out when you make the compilation note, is that correct?
Correct.
But it's on the raw data footage?
It's on raw data, yes.
Deputy, when you made this compilation video, when you reviewed the raw data, did you document in your report the times we've been talking about here today?
Yes, it.
Do you know what time he arrived pulling into that pump?
If I refer to my notes, I can tell you.
Yes, you may.
So for my notes, at 10:11 a.m. is when the vehicle is first observed pulling in and pulling up to the pumps.
We notated at the time where he is observed stepping out of the cashier line and going back to the beer cooler. Do you know what time that was?
That would be 10:13.
And then with the when you were able to review the receipt that popped up at the time and the product, what was it that he purchased?
He purchased a single Corona Extra 24-ounce can of beer and a pack of Marlboro cigarettes.
Okay. And ultimately, what time does he walk out of the store and then leave the parking lot, those last two times?
He started in the store at 10:14 and seen leaving the parking lot at 10:16 a.m.
Nothing further, Judge.
Cross-examination, Mr. Shoemaker.
Yes, Your Honor. As far as the receipts or what you saw that he purchased, there was no gas on there?
He did not purchase any gas at the register.
At the register. So in order to pay for it, I guess when he put the gas nozzle in the car, he would have paid for it at the pump?
It appears so, yes.
Did you ever check those records to see what was purchased?
I did not.
1 second. I have nothing else.
Any redirect examination?
No, Your Honor.
That you McGinnis excused.
He is by the state.
Your Honor, if we could just keep them under subpoena.
You're still under scrutiny, you're subject to recall, but you are excused for now. You still can't talk about it.
Yes, Your Honor, thank you very much.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's time to call it a day. We will go ahead and just a few moments break for the day. Let me caution you during the weekend to please do not view, listen to, watch, or read any media accounts of the case. There will be media accounts of it, so please avoid that at all costs. Don't do any research of any type. Don't discuss this case with anybody during the weekend. Leave your notes here. They will be secured over the weekend by the bailiffs. And I do wish you a good weekend. We would like to have you back at 8:45 on Monday morning, same place, same time, same place, at the jury lounge. And have a great weekend.